Hello, you're about to hear the first episode of the Brené Brown summary series I wrote off her book, Daring Greatly. This is a Patreon series, so if you'd like to get all of the episodes as they're released, there's going to be about 12 of them, go on over to patreon.com/nerdpreneur. To become a patron and join our board of nerdpreneurs, it costs about a coffee a month, and there is a backlog of content. All of our full-length episodes. We've got interviews with really interesting nerdpreneurs that turned their nerdy passions into a business, such as a tarantula breeder, dice makers, a zombie magician, and that's just to name a few of them. And then we've got what we call Talking Nerdy episodes. That's where Chris and I take a deep dive into a topic that includes business and mindset discussions, how AI is a pretty good wingman, and our ultimate list of tabletop role-playing games. If any of those strike your interest, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/nerdpreneur. By joining our board of nerdpreneurs, you're going to help our show grow and tell Chris and I that you like what we're doing. And someday, we're going to take that money and we're going to go to live events and interview nerdpreneurs on site and in person, doing what they love. So head on over to Patreon. Link is in the episode description. All right, here we go. Hi there, I'm Frank, and this is a series of my scholarly, nerdy ponderings and writings from Brené Brown's Daring Greatly. In 3 words: discomfort, courage, and growth. So you're going to be asking yourself, what is this series? What can I expect from it? Well, in it, I am going to share key takeaways from Daring Greatly. This all started back about a year ago when I first started reading this book. It was so rich and not in a dense way, but it was rich in what it had to say. And Brené has done so much research, and there's so much that I felt was right in my core. There was a truth there that I hadn't really looked at before. So I wanted to do an assignment because I knew that if I read the book, put it down, I might forget these things. And they had changed my life so much, I didn't want to forget them. So the assignment I did was write 1 to 2 key takeaways from a chapter. And this idea came from, it might sound familiar, back in school when teachers would say, after you've read the book, go home and write some takeaways or a summary. So that's what this is. But of course, I call this a summary, but it really is just my key takeaways because I don't want to try to summarize all of what Brené wrote. There's so much more in the book, and she does such an amazing job laying it out. By listening to this series, my hope is that you're going to learn more about yourself, the world around you, and how the two interact so that you can live a fuller, richer life. Ultimately, this will make you a stronger, more resilient person that's open and available for opportunities and relationships out there. And I say that from a personal place because that is exactly how this book affected me. For example, it helped me to recognize and honor and communicate my boundaries. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, and setting our boundaries is something that's really good for our needs because really we're the one that's going to take care of ourselves. And if listening to this series inspires you to read Daring Greatly or any of Brené's other books, all the better. You are going to enjoy this series if you enjoy personal growth, if you've read this book at one time and you kind of want a refresher, or if you haven't read this book and you would like some of the highlights and key takeaways, or if you just like the sound of my voice. If you haven't heard of Brené Brown, I'm going to give you a crash course right now. She's a successful researcher on shame, vulnerability, empathy, and compassion. She's been doing that research over a course of 2+ decades, and she really blew up in the beginning with TED Talks. Her first one went viral, and then her second one was because she was requested to come back by popular demand. And that's actually where I saw her first, was in her first TED Talk on YouTube, not live. She also has a bunch of books, Daring Greatly just being one of them. She has 2 podcasts. Side note, Dare to Lead is a very good podcast. She's great as a host. She has really insightful questions, and she has some amazing people on there. And of course, she has a Netflix special, which is really quite good. So yeah, Brené is a big deal, and I super admire her for what she's done and also how she has made my life better. So that's a big reason I wanted to do this series, is so that other people can benefit from Brené's research and maybe their life will also improve as well. When I was sharing an early draft of this with a friend, they suggested that I give a definition of vulnerability. And I think that's a really great idea. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, just to set the stage so that we're all on the same page of what vulnerability means when I talk about it. One definition that I found said that vulnerable means weak and likely to be hurt. But I don't like this definition. And in fact, Brené kind of talks about this at one point in the book. Weak implies a fragility, like something's going to break if it's damaged. But really, vulnerability is more about the resilience that you have. While being open to potential attack, you're still resilient in the face of danger. That's why I like the New Oxford Dictionary of English's definition. It says, to be vulnerable means to be exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. And this possibility of attack here, that's what I'm talking about. And I don't want to give too much away because as this series continues, we're going to talk about vulnerability and resilience and those ways and tricks to stay true to ourselves, but also stay in a healthy mindset and feel like our mental health is intact despite going into these vulnerable places. And just as a quick example, for me, this podcast is a great example of being vulnerable. Not just this series, but also Nerdpreneur in general. Putting myself out there is pretty scary. Putting myself out on the internet's pretty scary, not gonna lie. And being able to have that vulnerability and resilience is largely due to this book giving me that strength. And a more relatable example that I think anybody, regardless of whether you have a podcast or not, can tie into are those times when we meet new people and we're scared to show our true selves because we're afraid of what they might think if they really get to know us. I felt that way. Sometimes I still do. But this book helped me realize that showing my true self is the best part of me being available to the world and opportunities. When I hide my true self, I'm not being me. I am being somebody else that others want me to be, or that I think others want me to be. And lastly, before we jump into the reading, I want to give one last general theme that goes throughout this entire series. We are going to talk a lot about vulnerability, shame, compassion, and empathy. We'll go through each one as they come up. We'll define them just as we did vulnerability right there. And we'll make sure that we're all on the same page. Some of this is going to feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort is just because it's unfamiliar. Like I said at the start, the three words about all of this are discomfort, courage, and growth. Even though you'll feel discomfort, with a bit of courage and perseverance, you're going to grow. And now I will read to you the intro of what is vulnerability. Vulnerability is a loaded word. It stirs up anxiety and hesitation in most people. The idea of taking off our armor and exposing our inner workings and thoughts is off-putting. At the same time, embracing vulnerability is liberating. It helps us connect and grow in a huge way. But what does Brené Brown mean when she talks about vulnerability? What has she learned about it over the decades of research, conversations, papers, speeches, and videos she's made? She says, vulnerability is not knowing victory or defeat. It's understanding the necessity of both. It's engaging. It's being all in. First, I want to stress the point that vulnerability is not bad. It feels like standing on a cliff 2 inches from the edge every day. There you feel scared of falling, but also ready for adventure and more alive than ever. In our everyday lives, vulnerability looks more like asking for a raise, inviting a crush on a date, or telling someone how much you appreciate them. Like I said, doing these things might feel like you're about to fall off a cliff. That's why we avoid them and push them off until we have no other choice but to act. But if we wait, we might miss out on relationships and opportunities that would change our lives for the better. Vulnerability is also your willingness to engage in these scary moments and make the most of our relationships and precious time. By daring greatly, you're daring to engage when you normally wouldn't, when you'd normally back away, when you'd normally watch someone else brave the cliff's edge and wish it was you. The beauty of being vulnerable is that you're more open with yourself and others. By being open and receptive, we genuinely connect and grow. After all, that's what we all want, is to connect with others and grow into our potential. Okay, there's a couple talking points, 3 specifically, that I wanted to dive into real quick about that writing. First off, vulnerability. It brings up so many feelings for different people. Maybe anxiety, fear, excitement, an allure of sorts. For me, whenever I meet new people, I get all of those feelings. But for me, it's a little different. I actually really enjoy the idea of meeting new people to hear their stories. But I know for a lot of people, there's a lot of anxiety, fear, trepidation, and the excitement that goes along with it. For some people, meeting new people maybe isn't the best example, but go with me on this. Vulnerability has a lot of emotions around it. So being mindful of what that is for you is a good first step. The second thing I wanted to talk about is braving that cliff's edge every day. I really like this metaphor because the cliff's edge is a relatable experience. When you stand on a high place, your palms probably get a little sweaty. I'm a little bit afraid of heights, so when I'm up there, I kind of envision the Grand Canyon. So when I'm putting myself in that mental location, my palms start to sweat. Like right now they are. So being in that place in your everyday life is where you're going to find that growth. Think of that expression, you got to get out of your comfort zone. The cliff's edge is your discomfort zone. And by being there, you're already setting yourself up to grow. And the importance of all of this talk about connection and growth is that you get to bring these 2 things into your awareness. And by doing that, you are making yourself more available for opportunity and relationships. And like I was saying at the end there, what we really care about in life are our connections and our growth. And lastly, I feel like this wouldn't be complete if there wasn't some sort of next steps for you, the listener, now that you have this information. To me, a simple way to apply this is to start by opening your awareness to those uncomfortable situations that are actually opportunities for you to shed your armor and exercise this vulnerability. This might be a time when you want to express yourself or communicate more openly, but you might normally stop yourself because you're embarrassed or worried how others might react. For me, that was the communicating of my boundaries and then honoring them. By communicating them more openly rather than just doing what someone else asked of me, I was growing. I didn't do it because I was afraid I might push people away and they might judge me harshly. So look out for those times when you normally step away from this cliff's edge and ask yourself what you'd like to do in that situation. What would be good for your growth? Maybe go the extra mile and journal about your experiences, these questions, and what you'd like to do. For me, writing stuff down is actually the best way to process my thoughts. It's just a way to look back and kind of make it more permanent. Once I've taken something out of my mind and put it onto paper, it makes it more real. And there you have it. That is the first episode of my Brené Brown Daring Greatly summary series. I'm really proud of the series. And if you'd like to connect with me to talk about what your key takeaways, I'd really love to hear them. You can find me on Twitter, or what they call now X, either at Nerdpreneur Pod or my personal account, Frank R. Bailey IV. And lastly, please leave this podcast a review on Apple Podcasts. That goes a really long way. And of course, tell your friends and family about us. It really helps our show grow. Thank you again. Have a great day. And as always, keep it nerdy. Hello, Nerdpreneurs. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you would like to get all of the other episodes in this series, head on over to patreon.com/nerdpreneur and join our board of nerdpreneurs. There you're going to get these episodes as they release, as well as all of our other content that already exists and will continue to be released. I'm talking about interviews, business advice, mindset wisdom, and all of that is going to be on our full-length episodes. So head on over to Nerdpreneur on Patreon. Check us out there and have a great day. Keep it nerdy, everybody.